Welcome everyone to episode number 33 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. So it's been a long run we've been doing this for, and we have a special episode today. I think it's the third one now, third or fourth one we've done. It's an AOA Q&A.
AOA Q&A.
Which is always fun because I love hearing the questions from all of our listeners, everyone on Instagram that are posting the questions when we send them out in our stories prompting for that. So it's always exciting. I don't know exactly what all the questions are myself. Jesse's going to be throwing some at both of ourselves, but hopefully we'll have some interesting ones in here. To start us off, though, Jesse has an interesting fishing fact for us. So we'll see if it lives up to its name again, and if Jesse can also live up to his name of being an average angler.
Well, this is very interesting, as I always say. I thought I would do an interesting fishing fact on something that I haven't put much thought into at all, but now that I think of it, I'm like, I didn't know that. So hopefully some of you guys didn't know this too. Maybe you're all smart. Who knows? Probably not.
So Jesse didn't put much thought into this fishing fact, so you can skip ahead about 3 minutes. We'll get to the actual Q&A.
So musky teeth.
Oh, good old teethers.
The old teeths. This interesting fishing fact is about musky teeth because I was thinking, I saw a post someone had caught a muskie and they were like, wow, this muskie bit so hard on this lure that it left one of its teeth inside of the lure, like actually jammed inside of this this bait. And I was like, okay, what happens when a muskie loses its teeth? What happens? I didn't know.
I have no clue.
Exactly. So I looked it up. That's what interesting fishing fact is all about, right? It's about learning stuff that you don't know. So a little bit about muskie teeth, just so you know, just to start out. If you've never seen a muskie, you need to Google search this, like a muskie's mouth, okay? Muskie have very large mouths filled with razor sharp teeth.
And that's not a stretch of the word to say they're razor sharp. They literally are razor sharp.
They actually have both bigger canines and smaller needle-like teeth. They have two different kinds of teeth. And an adult muskie can have between 500 and 700 teeth, depending on their size. The bigger teeth, the canines, they can be over an inch long.
What?
Over an inch long. Brutal. So if you've ever seen inside of the muskie's mouth, you may notice that along the bottom edge of their mouth, that's where they have the canine, like big pointy spear-like teeth. But on the top of their mouth, what do they have?
It's smaller teeth.
Yeah, but it's on those like two pad-like structures on top. So they have on the roof of their mouth two prickly pad-like areas covered with countless small needle-like teeth. Now the majority of the teeth angle inward.
Yes.
And why is that, Andrew?
It's because once they have something in their mouth, then it's harder for that to escape. It's like barbs pointing backward on a hook.
Exactly. So when that muskie grabs down on something, say it's a bait fish or your hand, it's very difficult to get out. So the larger teeth, on the other hand, they are up to an inch long, like we said. They're brutally sharp, and their job is to brutally impale any fish or wildlife that they clamp down on.
Brutally?
Brutally.
Ugh.
Like they're deep. Imagine like these 1 inch long, basically sharp little spears just digging into your hand. And not just one of them, dozens of them. And then when that happens, the big pads of needle-like teeth on top also jag into your hand and literally...
The death Velcro on top of their mouth.
Death Velcro is a very good explanation of that. So that's why you want to keep your hand out of their mouths. But have you ever heard this folklore that muskie or pike lose their teeth in the summer?
Yes, it's or after a cold front, they lost their teeth.
Exactly.
They're not feeding.
So many old timers have said this, and they say this because they believe that the fish have shedded their teeth in the summer months because they stopped feeding. They're like, oh, they have no teeth. They obviously can't eat. Now that obviously is a myth because in reality, what people learned as people became, more experienced muskie fishing and with better electronics, that muskie actually just go deep in the summer. They're not in the same spots that they are when the water's a little cooler. So in reality, muskie just change location. They don't lose their teeth. And some people think that muskie would just shed all their teeth at once, which doesn't even make sense. Okay,
muskie dentures just floating around.
Just all of a sudden the muskie wakes up one day and it just like opens his mouth and the teeth just float out of its mouth all at the same time. It's like, well, I guess I won't eat for a few weeks. Anyway, so you may wonder, teeth, they obviously lose their teeth. They're not like our teeth. Like if I knock out one of my teeth, the thing's not growing back. Yeah. I'm just going to look like a freak after that. Have a weird whistle.
More so.
Exactly. So teeth that are broken from a muskie, worn or fall out, they're grown back individually.
Okay.
So that being said, old and sick fish can have trouble regrowing teeth back, and toothless fish have been caught. Usually they're large ones. And that obviously, catches like that explain the origin that some people have about, muskie losing their teeth in the summer. So like I said, their teeth are individually grown back. So if one of them breaks out, the other one will start to grow. The other ones are still there. It's not like, the teeth pops out. All the teeth fall out, then they all start growing back originally. Like, no.
Because I was obsessed with sharks growing up. And they grow their teeth in rows. So if teeth get damaged, the teeth are constantly replacing themselves whether they need it or not. And the next row will grow forward, and the one behind keeps coming up.
Exactly.
So I wasn't sure if it was going to be similar, but it's cool they can grow individual ones.
which is pretty cool. Because I mean, if you've ever caught a muskie, it's happened to me, not a big tooth, but I've had musky teeth like in the bottom of the boat when you're fishing a hard bait, like a suic or something, and they grab onto it. And as you're trying to get the hook out, sometimes, they're thrashing around in the net and a tooth just pops out. Yeah. It's gone. So obviously they grow their teeth back, which is cool. Imagine if they didn't, though. You'd know the pressured lakes. You're like, you catch a muskie, it only has 3 teeth. You're like, wow,
so
this guy's been caught a few times.
So tell me, Jesse, do you have like a small little jar that you have all musky teeth in? Like, people have their baby teeth in their jar and they keep that for decades for some reason. And you're just like, here's my little musky teeth.
We should start collecting musky teeth. That is a good question, though. If any of you guys or girls have any musky teeth, start collecting them and send us a picture of them.
I thought you were going to say send them to us. I'm like, what are we going to do with all these musky teeth?
We don't want your baby teeth.
No, thank you.
Anyway, with such shark-like attributes, do muskie attack humans? That's the second part. We're thinking of these teeth. Do they attack muskies? Or do muskies attack muskies? Yes, they do. Do they attack humans? It's rare, but it happens. But it's rare. There have been more than a few reported attacks, and many of them have happened in Ontario. Dun, dun, dun. There's been a lot of attacks. If you look it up, it's pretty scary. Yeah. But the most recent one that was on the news is in 2020. A woman named Kim Driver was wading chest deep in an Ontario lake when a big muskie latched onto her leg. It was like, ooh, that's a big sucker. So obviously, a big muskie latched onto her leg. You got those big canine teeth just digging in. You got all those needle teeth pointing in. So the fish is not coming off. It's just thrashing around on her leg.
And it shakes. It's just slicing up more.
Yeah. Think of all those teeth just slicing up. So her family helped her get out of the water, and the fish actually popped off. Thank goodness. Imagine just trying to pry a fish off your leg. Yep. Anyway, so she was rushed to the Kenora Hospital, where the doctors found severe scrapes and deep puncture wounds she eventually needed plastic surgery for. So it was pretty brutal. Yeah. Just imagine that. You're like, fresh water, no sharks. And you just wade out. And then you're just like to your mom or your dad, you're like, you said it was safe. So should you be afraid?
Be very afraid.
Yeah.
If you're one of those very rare statistics.
Yeah. So not really. The odds of that happening are extremely low. You're literally probably more likely to trip on the sidewalk and break your neck.
You're highly more likely to get injured, walking down the dock to get to the water than after you're in the water.
Exactly. And there's lots of local stories, like even in our area, because we have listeners from all over. And I'm actually going to get into that in just a sec before we start our Q&A. But we have listeners from all over. But in our local area of the Kawartha Lakes in southern Ontario, there are many local lore of muskie in the lakes. I have heard several times, and I'm not sure if it's true. I have never looked up the actual news report. But I've heard of a story of a lady that let her little poodle go swimming in Lake Scugog, and a muskie came up and took it.
I don't know if it was the same story, but I do remember in Ontario Out of Doors, in the news section, this is going back years, I don't know how many years, there was an account of someone playing fetch with their dog, and their dog was eaten by a muskie. Yeah. It's like a small dog. I don't know what breed. But it could have been that event, but I know, again, that was local. I was not, or at least in Ontario.
Yeah, they attack massive things. Like, I personally have seen muskie attack, ducklings.
Didn't you see one?
I saw one.
Go to great blue heron.
It wasn't a full-size heron. I'm not sure if it was a great blue heron or like a smaller heron, but it was some kind of water heron.
Like the white heron or something?
And me and my buddy were fishing in Rice Lake, and this thing was thrashing around on the surface. So we drove up to it, and we're like, is it attached with fishing line or like what's going on? We thought maybe a snapping turtle had grabbed it. It was a huge muskie. It was 45-plus inch muskie. It was just latched onto the bird. and not very well, but he was trying to like get it out of the shallows, and we were like, oh my goodness. And this was like years ago, so I didn't get any photos of it, but it was super cool.
Well, they eat
terrible.
muskrats. Muskrats are big.
Yeah.
Like, I know many people that with their family dog is smaller than a muskrat.
Yeah. So anyway, so these teeth on the muskie, they're definitely nasty, super nasty teeth. So if you're targeting muskie, my honest, or well, not honest, but if you're targeting muskie, you definitely need a wire leader or a heavy fluorocarbon leader. A lot of people ask if you use titanium or like a braided wire leader, or at least, you know, a thick 100 to 150 pound fluorocarbon leader, because they will cut through braid super easy. It's not even like people will be like, oh, I'll use a 80-pound braid. Muskie won't be able to cut through that. Easy.
Oh, easily.
No problem. It's like scissors. No problem at all. So definitely make sure you use leaders. And if you're swimming in musky lakes, you probably won't get bit, but
Swim with more people, and the chance of you getting bit is less.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my interesting fishing fact. What do you think about that?
I like it. That was very good. I think I would give that a 91.5 out of 100. That was very good.
That's pretty good. So, like I mentioned before, that we have followers from all over Ontario. We have a podcast analytics that we like to look through every week to see, how many views, like what episodes are doing well, and where our listeners are from. And I generally thought that, most of our listeners on our podcast are from Ontario, which is true. Mm-hmm. In fact, the vast majority of our listeners are from Canada, and all over Canada, mostly Ontario, but all over Canada. But I just thought I'd give a shout out to number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and number 6 on the list of the most listeners that we have from different places. And they are from places you would not expect.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is outside of Canada?
Yeah. So number 1 is Canada.
Okay.
We have the most followers or listeners in Canada. Number 2,
USA.
No problem.
Okay.
USA, obviously. Number 3 is somewhere where they go pike fishing a lot. Overseas.
Europe?
Sweden.
Sweden. Okay.
Sweden. We actually have a lot of listeners in Sweden, a few hundred of them.
Wow, that's awesome.
Well, a few hundred downloads over 30 episodes. So maybe there's like one guy over there that just listens to every episode 3 times. I don't know. Number 4 is the United Kingdom. Number 5 is the Netherlands. And number 6 is Ireland. So there's people from all over. If you personally are one of those people from, all around the world, definitely send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear what you think. So I just thought that was interesting that there's followers that follow the podcast all over. And it's not just randomly one download. It's like a lot of the episodes. So that's pretty cool. So AOA Q&A. So I put a story on our Instagram. If you'd like to ever put an AOA Q&A up of your own question, make sure you follow us on Instagram. Mm-hmm. I put up a post this morning, and look at how many we got.
Oh boy, we're gonna fill this entire episode, people.
I got about
That's awesome.
I got about 50, and I thought we could just go through some of these, and we're gonna answer in 1 minute or less.
Okay.
So we're gonna kind of time each other 1 minute or less, because sometimes me and Andrew can ramble.
We're gonna say that we're gonna do our best to answer in 1 minute or less, but if we get on a rant, that's gonna change. So just deal with it.
Okay.
We make our own rules here.
All right. Andrew has the first question from our buddy Yakin Bassin.
Cool.
You have 1 minute to answer this question. Will technology ruin fishing?
I don't foresee it really happening. I think it's always giving us more of a benefit as we go along, but I don't think it's going to really ruin fishing. I can see if eventually it becomes super accessible for absolutely everyone, that's also considering that absolutely everyone also wants to go fishing, then it could put a lot more pressure onto our lakes. But overall, I don't really see it as it's so expensive, and that the guys that can purchase it aren't usually the guys that are ruining the ecosystem. So I don't think it's that bad.
That was only 34 seconds. Good job. I'll use the rest of this time. I feel like Andrew said, I don't think it's going to ruin fishing. I feel like exactly what you said, that technology that people say is ruining fishing, it's only accessible to a small percentage of people that can afford it. Mm-hmm. So, say like LiveScope was like $200, then fishing would be ruined. Boy. But it's $5,000, $10,000. Like it's a lot of money. So, there's still plenty of opportunities just to spend a few bucks and go fishing. So it may ruin a certain type of fishing for you. Like, you can, fish these bass tournaments, and it might ruin that. But the rest of it, it's fine.
Yeah.
Next question. A lot of people, I'm sorry guys, but if you ask us questions like, hey, you guys know any fishing spots near this lake or this lake? We don't know, so I'm not just going to answer those questions because some of them are just in random places in Ontario that I've never been to. So I apologize for that.
Or even then, it could be places that we have heard of, but it's not information that we can divulge because we didn't find those spots. Like we talked before about finding spots is something that takes years. Like Jesse and I found a few spots, and we keep those pretty closely guarded because if word gets out, and especially on a podcast like this, if we were to announce someone's spot, ours or anyone else's, and then next weekend there's 100 people, you're not going to be very happy about it yourself. So let alone the person who provided us with information. So they're not trying to block anyone from getting out there and enjoy fishing, but there's tons of opportunities. And if you get out and you can find your own spot, there's so much satisfaction that can be gained. And what we do on the podcast is try and give you as much usable information so that you can go to any body of water and be able to have success without knowing, oh, this is a hot spot. You can just know the basics kind of thing.
Exactly. So next question in 60 seconds or less. Phil Daniel 33 asks, what's the bait or brand that people love that you just don't get? Guggen Squad.
Guggen Squad.
Yeah.
Everything looks exactly the same that it can get on the actual manufacturers that they steal these things from, and it costs less. So I don't know why I would spend more for something that's just a copy.
And made in China.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I've nothing.
They marketed themselves really well.
They're great at marketing themselves.
Yes, that they've done well. So I can get it, but at the same time, I don't know why people.
It's not anything unique generally.
Yeah.
The marketing was fantastic.
Like
that's why they
had
blew
the
up.
exact same brand in mind. As soon as that, we're like Guggen Squad.
Yeah. You know, they get such a bad rep, and like for years, I'm just like, I don't like that brand. It's targeted for like amateur anglers and
Guggens.
And
that's
kids.
literally what the term means is an amateur.
Exactly.
Is a Guggen.
Is this stuff bad? No, it's copies of good stuff. So
yeah,
it's obviously
it works.
good. But do I ever buy Guggen Squad stuff? No. Would I ever?
You've had a couple things just to try it.
We tried a few things. I didn't find it anything. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd prefer, like I said, I'd prefer to get something that works, in my opinion, just as good for slightly less. That's still from a brand, like a big brand company.
I have noticed though that Guggen Squad like this year has really I haven't seen a lot of stuff going on. Also, if you were one of those guys that's like, I love Guggen Squad, I know what you guys are talking about, I almost guarantee you are probably under the age of 25. And if I'm right,
or from Florida.
Yeah.
Sorry, American listeners.
It's good stuff though. It works.
Yes.
If it works for you, it works for you. That's great. If you like to spend slightly more money on the same thing, go for it. All right, here's a good question from Gablehead. He said, what baits hooked you as a fisherman but haven't hooked many or any fish? Well, honestly, of all the years me and Andrew fished together, which has been over 20 years, Andrew's only hooked himself once.
Yep.
And I've never hooked myself with Andrew.
And I've hooked myself once more outside of that.
Yeah. And
so I guess
Mega Bass.
So here's the thing. The Mega Bass was with you, and I have caught way more fish than myself on it.
Yeah.
The other one that I have only ever hooked myself on was a Rapala Clack and Wrap.
Ooh.
And I got that you know the front treble has that big hook?
Yeah.
I had the big one, and it went right in my elbow.
Ooh.
But I was able to push it up through all the way, cut it, slide it out. So it worked out. My dad helped me get it out when I was 15 or 16 at the time.
You're like, take it like a man.
We're like back like camping, and Dad's like, we're not going to the hospital.
Remember my dad would always say that, I don't feel like going to the hospital today. It's like, come on, you never feel like going to the hospital.
My dad also didn't want to go to the hospital when he was teaching me how to chop wood, and I hit his finger while he was holding a twig on the chopping block, and I cut right to the bone, and he just refused to go to the hospital. So
your dad's hardcore.
For me just to get like a hook in the elbow, he's like, no, that's not worth it.
Here's a good question from Lowbuck Adventure Truck. He said, it's a funny question. If you had to pick one species to fight, what fish and how many could you take at once?
That's a good question. So let me think of this.
I'll go first because I've already thought of mine.
Okay.
So I would definitely fight a bunch of lake trout from Georgian Bay, because I heard that Georgian Bay lake trout fight like wet towels. Like they're not like other lake trout that fight really hard. These apparently Georgian Bay lake trout, guys don't like catching them because it's like reeling in a wet sock. So I would take on 300 of those, no problem. And I would just be there just punching choom, 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 because they wouldn't even fight. They would just like, you hit them once, they flop on the ground, they'd be dead. Throw them right in the frying pan, no grease needed.
See, part of me was thinking pike, oddly enough, because a lot of the lakes you go and catch pike, you hook them and they don't even move until they see the boat. So if I could just start, striking these guys, they're not even trying for the first bit of the fight, at least.
Yeah, and plus most of the time when they're right beside the boat, they throw the hook. So like they'd probably come up and try to attack you and then just like give up.
The other reason why I said pike is because cinematically, to have some like super aggressive apex predator, but then one guy can take on, I don't know, I'm gonna say like 50. They're piking it big. I'm telling you, these aren't like hammer handles. Like I'm talking good pike. That'd be a pretty cool like cinematic fight.
But what if I was launching them at you with a cannon?
Then I choose Creek Chub.
Fair. All right, here's a good question from Supernoof71. How late in the year do you fish in your boat? So why don't I go first with my sports pal, because it's a canoe. We have had that thing out in very late weather, which I would not recommend, because we do not have the proper wetsuits, or like the dry suits,
The
I
dry
guess.
suit, yeah.
So I know I see guys out all the time and they're like, oh, we're fishing lake trout opener on Simcoe, and they don't have a proper dry suit. Very dangerous. If you did happen to fall in, hypothermia, you're in a very bad situation. We used to push mine through ice.
Mine too.
Yeah. In a canoe, we'd push it through ice in some of these smaller bays to go pike fishing. I would not recommend that. It's dumb. We did it when we were younger. Now that we're older and slightly more mature, I would not recommend it.
Like I have to go to work in 2 days. I'm not about to risk,
Yeah.
even if I'm not injured, I
have
get
a
sick
family
from it.
now.
Yeah.
I have to get home and feed my goldfish. But for my sports pal, generally the time that I get it out, if I have a choice, is going to be anywhere from generally May.
Mm-hmm.
I feel comfortable taking it out. Again, I've taken it out in April and March even, but May all the way up till the end of October. At the end of October, the water temps are usually like, well under 60 degrees, like 50 degrees even sometimes. I'm not going out in a canoe. I don't have the proper equipment. If you're in a slightly bigger boat, like Andrew's, what do you say?
So for now that I have the tinner, I'd be willing to, as long as it's open water, go out in the water. That being said, I would limit myself to what bodies of water I'd go on. Yes. I'm not going to go on a big lake where the waves, like even we were out just last weekend, and it's fall, but it's not crazy cold yet, thankfully. And going across the lake, it's busy still, so there's still some boats in the water, and you go over these wakes and they're just splashing over the bow. It's not like flooding the boat by any means, but Jesse at the front, he's getting wet. I was getting splashed.
Yeah.
When it gets colder weather, I don't want that happening. I don't want to have water coming in the boat. I'm not at risk of my boat flipping. I'm at risk of just myself getting soaked still.
Yeah.
So if I was going out, I'd stay on river systems or stuff where it's smaller bodies of water. The waves can't get that big. That's where I would stay focused, but I would still feel comfortable bundling up and going out there in my tinner.
Usually I'd say the latest that we go out in your boat is usually by November we're packing it up.
Yeah.
That being said, if I had a slightly larger boat, I would be trolling for Musky all the way into December.
Oh yeah.
I would have no problem with that. I was just saying to Andrew, we put on our legit ice fishing float suit and just sit in the boat and troll. Don't care. The weather does not bother me at all, as long as it's not like very bad conditions,
yes.
like dangerous. And again, the older we get, the more we're like, it's not worth risking your life for a fish. So just keep that in mind. Here's a question. Do you ever think about a spot, go to another one, and deeply regret the one that you didn't go to? Every day I go fishing. Sometimes I'll be like, I'll have a really good day and be like, yes, I'm a genius. And then the next time it happens, I'm like, am I so dumb?
Jesse and I, we did a trip a while ago where we fished 3 lakes in 2 days. And the first lake we went to, we weren't there for very long because we just went up in the afternoon, fished it for a bit till we went and set up the site.
And I broke a fishing rod.
Yeah, so that was unfortunate. But that was our best fishing was that one, was that lake. And the weather, again, it was poor weather, but we know that lake pretty well to be able to find fish even during the cold front. But then we moved on to a couple other lakes, which we have fished before, but haven't either fished in a long time or don't know that well yet. And unfortunately, it was
just a waste.
It was a waste for we didn't catch anything of substance.
The wind was blowing us around.
The wind was bad, so we were extremely limited, whereas the other lake would have been way better for the wind, just because it's a bit more sheltered of an area. So it's kind of like, it's usually weather dependent as to why I regret it more so than the fishing quality. Because I'd rather be somewhere where I can casually move my boat around because I'm in a sheltered river system or something like that, or there's lots of like deep bays in the shoreline, rather than being blown about in a big open lake.
Yeah. So, I mean, we all make mistakes. Unfortunately, time is time. Like,
Yeah.
you go to a lake, sometimes you have no choice as to what lake you're going to fish.
Yep.
Like, oh, I have to go to this lake because it's close and I only have a few hours to fish. And other times you're just like, I want to try a new lake, and you try it and it's just like, it's a bust, nothing. And you're like, oh, I could have went to this other lake.
So that's the thing. Doing that, though, I don't regret it. Like, on the day I might be like, oh, I wish I would have caught something. Yes. But at the same time, I don't regret it, because otherwise I'll always think, what if, and I'll try that lake another time. If I go there and I try it and I at least know now what the water's like. And even some lakes, you might have a bad day because the weather was poor, but you look at the conditions of the lake and there's lots of bait fish here. I've heard good things. I really like the underwater structure, these weed bends, it looks good. We will go back. So sometimes it's worth it. And there are other times we try a new spot and we look and I can see why I've never fished here before.
And I never will. Yeah. So fishing is a learning experience. It's hard for us sometimes during the summer. It's like you want to fish the same lakes because you know them well. There's fish there. But then there's all these other lakes, because Ontario is full of lakes. And you're like, I've always wanted to try this lake. I've wanted to try that lake. And sometimes it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. But you can't just fish the same lakes unless the lakes you're fishing are legit amazing. Yeah. It's nice to try new lakes. Next question. This is a 3-parter because it's a long question. So this guy asks, he said, there's a lot of gatekeeping in the fishing community, and it's hard for someone new and average to get started and to know what to do, where to go. What resources do you recommend for people to learn the ropes and enjoy their time on the water with other fishing buds?
I mean, gatekeeping, like not telling people where spots are?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So there is that. That is going to happen. But again, like we already talked about, it's because it's tough to get a good spot, and especially you don't want the spot that you found to get overrun. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
But there's amazing resources. So, for instance, if you're already listening to this podcast, you already follow us. We do our best, like I said, to talk about informative stuff that you can use no matter what body of water you go to. The fishing shows you can watch, there might be some where, like the Fish in Canada, I watched that for years. I still do. And you might look at it, oh yeah, but they're fishing up north and they're going for, they're in Lac Seul going walleye fishing. That's not what I'm fishing. You can still learn a lot. Learn from, they'll talk about where they're fishing on that lake. Oh, they're fishing this shoal or fishing this point. They're looking at this. You can then Google. There are some topographical maps that you can find online either for free. There's not a whole lot of good ones for free, but you can also get Navionics, which costs like $30 a year, and that has the topographical maps of any of your nearby lakes pretty much. And you can look at that and you say, hey, on that show, at this time of year in the spring, they were looking for walleye and on near these drop-offs or by this shoal on the sunny side. Like, okay, take that information, look at your local lake and see if any of those things match up, and then go try that spot. There's like whatever you're doing, every trip you have out, every time you're watching or listening to content, don't think of it as that only applies to that single area. Like we said, there's guys around the world that are listening to us, and there's stuff that we view that's down in Minnesota, musky fishing in Minnesota. Like, oh, well, none of what they do is going to work in Ontario. Well, that's not true. Like,
yeah, fish is a fish.
Texas rig. Guess what? That rig was made, was popular in Texas, but that rig is the most common rig up here for weedless fishing. It doesn't only work in Texas.
Yeah.
So everything you view, look at what you can glean and pull from it and put to work on your local water.
Yeah, and there's so many resources. Like, just as an example, I hate when people are like, oh, I can't find any information as to where to fish. This is Ontario. There's like hundreds of thousands of lakes.
Yeah.
And even if you live in the city, if you go on Google and search fishing near me or fishing near Toronto or fishing near wherever you live, Belleville, whatever, endless search results, endless forums, endless Facebook forums, endless Facebook groups, so much information. No one's going to hand you exact GPS coordinates for spots. But again, like Andrew said, you can learn areas that will catch fish. There's tons of information. Hire a guide. Maybe a little expensive, but if you have the funds to do it, hire a guide. Be like, I want to learn how to fish this lake. They'll take you out and teach you how to fish the lake. You can
find even that species too. You'll learn years of information that what would have taken you years to learn. You'll learn in a day picking a guide's brain.
Yeah. Another thing you can do is be social on social media. Don't just be someone that has a private account. Be social, get out there. You can make some fishing buddy friends. Like I fish with tons of guys that I met on Instagram over the years, and I've learned so much from them. So there's tons of information and resources out there. Do your research. As I forget what professional bass fisherman said this. One of those like OG legends guy. He said, fishing is a learnable skill. You may not be the Wayne Gretzky of fishing, but you can learn how to catch fish. You may not be out there, like Bob Azumi just pulling in, or like the Johnson brothers, right? We always say those guys are hammers and they have that insane natural skill to find fish. Mm-hmm. You may not be like that, but you can 100% go out and catch fish in Ontario. They're fish. They're dumb. So anyway, that was a rant. You're supposed to stop me after 60 seconds.
That's what the editing is for.
Yeah. So Colin asks, favorite way to catch steelhead?
I actually really like
crankbaits.
I like crankbaits.
I knew he was going to say that.
But I really like end of the season. Like dropbacks is one of my funnest time, just because they are generally, I find, easier to, like they're trying to put on a feed again as they're going back to the lake. And if you get the right time and you go out for a day and you're going for stream trout as well, for the native trout up there, and then you come across a pool and there's still some steelhead there, they're not dimes. No. But they still have a lot of energy, and they're still, again, they're not salmon, they're not dead, they're not zombie fish.
Yeah.
So you can get some pretty cool looking rainbows.
And they're aggressive. They'll hit spinners and crankbaits. They're aggressive
at the drop back stage.
Now, I know a lot of like diehard steelhead guys would be like, oh, I don't even like fishing for drop backs. But again, like Andrew said, they're fun to catch, and you can catch them on like, if you're fly fishing, like streamers. Yeah. Try stripping a streamer through a pool and see like a big 8-pound buck come up and just crush it, because they're trying to feed up, because they haven't eaten that much in a long time, and all of a sudden they're done spawning, their mind's done, they're like, oh, I'm done now, it's time to eat.
Yeah.
So my favorite way is the opposite of that.
Beads.
No. Oh. I like fishing for steelhead in early like late winter. And sometimes what would happen is you keep checking the river. You're like, it's still frozen. You go back the next day, it's still frozen. Then all of a sudden one day, it just opens up. It gets warm enough that the ice breaks. And then just like, it may be a small section that opens down by the mouth. And then you float fish, like row bags generally. And you're fishing and there's chunks of ice floating down the river. The water's like kind of murky and there's like ice shelves along the edge. And you're just like crunch, 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 walking up, float fishing. Your lines, everything's cold. And your float is like, you're fishing like frog water, basically, just like very slow water down by the mouth. And your float's just slowly moving. Sometimes it stops and slowly moves. And steelhead, when they come up sometimes after a good rain, it's almost like they come up in like waves. And you'll just see like wakes go into pools. Like you won't see the fish underneath. You'll just see like the water move as a fish comes into the pool. And it'll happen like all of the time. And you're like, oh my goodness, it's going to happen. And your float just like slowly goes down. And it's like, set the hook. And then all heck breaks loose. Yeah. And those fish, they're like dime silver. It's exciting because it's like, it seems like the water's dead because it's so cold. There's ice on the water. And you're like, there's no way there's going to be fish in there.
Ground.
But all these like super silver, ready to go fish are just coming up. And they're all like super fat and amazing. But that's my favorite way. But I do agree, fishing once the season opens and there's some dropbacks coming down, fishing with like hardware like spinners, crankbaits, it can be really fun. Yeah. And it's a great way if you're just getting into steelhead fishing too. So our buddy at the Morning Voice, I wonder what his voice sounds like in the morning.
Is it as good as Royce's voice?
Probably not. In the morning, he's like, I'm going to listen to Average Ontario Anglers this morning.
I'm going to listen to Average Ontario Anglers today.
So the Morning Voice, he says, when do you decide to tie on extra line to top up your reel versus respooling your entire reel? That's a good question because I'm cheap.
Yeah. For me, generally speaking, I run braid. I mainline braid on most everything. And so when I have a couple spools, going of, let's say I have a couple reels, they both have 45 or 50 pound braid, I'll actually take one off onto a spool and then spool from one reel onto the other, all that braid backwards. So the starting to get worn braid and weathered braid goes on first in the spool, which you basically never get to, and then it's all the fresh braid on top. I don't usually, again, if I ever snap off like a bunch of braid, I get a bad backlash and you can't get it out, or you snag super deep, or you have a nick in your line halfway up. Generally speaking, I'll retie a bit just for that trip so I can keep fishing. But as soon as I'm back, I try not to have a knot mid-line. That again, another addendum to that is I also like to fish when I'm going for something that I have a mono or a fluoro leader on. If I'm going for walleye or something like that, or there's no pike lake, I just have a nice like long leader, I'll tie on 10-15 feet and I'll just keep replacing that as need be.
So next question is Woolton. He asks, if you could only take one rod and reel with you in the boat, what would it be? Now I know my answer is going to be it depends. It's like, what are we fishing for? Bass, pike, musky.
Yeah.
But if you said to me, you live in Ontario and Great Lakes fishing aside, just like inland lakes, and you can only have one combo for fishing for everything, what would it be? I would probably pick a 7-foot to 7'3" medium power fast action spinning rod. I'd load it up with 15-pound braid. You guys have caught massive musky on combos like that, like walleye combos. It's perfect for most bass fishing except for heavy cover. It's a good walleye rod. It's good for northern pike. You could carp fish with it. You could chuck spinners for steelhead with it. It's a little heavy for panfish, but you could do it. It's not ideal for musky fishing again, but you could catch musky on it. Like, I feel like the medium is like just the best overall rod.
For me, I'd probably go medium heavy, but just to narrow it down a bit more, I'd find something that has like a lot of backbone, but a softer tip.
Yeah.
That way, but still medium heavy rating. So that way you can still use it for, like, it's still nice and sensitive if I'm going jig fishing for some lighter stuff. Or I can also still like work top waters and jigs, whatever I want to do with it. But that's the only thing I would change. And it would be a spinning reel instead of a bait caster, just because if I'm going to fish anything, the spinning reel can do everything. Bait casters are more limited.
Exactly.
Why are you sniffing your microphone?
Smells good. So here's a question from the mom understudy. She says, do you use trailers on spinner baits? If so, what do you recommend for pike?
I actually really like, it's something we've used for years, is just twister tail. I think on a spinner bait, it doesn't, I find as long as you're not using a huge twister tail on it, it doesn't cause the spinner bait to roll, like roll to the side. I know some paddle tails can kind of like cause it to rise up on its side.
Yep.
But a twister tail, it just, because it's like a ribbon back and forth, it keeps it balanced still, gives a lot of like extra, fancy undulating action out the back.
Yeah.
But I like something that gives a bit more longer of a profile. So I think that would be my go-to.
Yep. And one tip is to rig them upside down.
Yeah.
So the twister goes underneath. Otherwise, sometimes the twister goes up and hooks itself on the hook, which is annoying. One trailer that I started using this year that I actually really like, I'm not a huge paddle tail guy on spinner baits, but Pro Water Baits has I think it's called the Magic Minnow. And it's a paddle tail.
Is that thin one?
Yeah, but it's got a really long, thin tail with a paddle tail. And it almost looks like it was literally designed to go on a spinner bait.
Yeah.
And I used it this year. I have white, and I put it on my white spinner bait. It looked really good. Caught a ton of fish. I don't know if it was the extra, flappy action on the back or what, but it looked really good on the back. We do recommend, for pike fishing, I would recommend white spinner baits in general, or black. But just a big twister tail, like Andrew said, is really good. And a lot of musky guys do that. Though a lot of musky baits have big twister tails on them, like dive and rise baits. And I think that just extra flickering action, it just attracts like pike and musky. So I definitely recommend that. Here's a question from Thornburn the Fifth.
Love that guy.
Yeah, he says, "Have you ever had a salmon hit a topwater lure?"
No, I did have a salmon hit a J13 right as it hit the water once. It was on top of the water. It wasn't a topwater lure, but it did hit essentially a topwater. I think it honestly would have hit anything that landed in the water just right then. It was just aggressive salmon, and it was real ticked off.
Yeah, the weirdest thing I caught on a topwater lure was a bunch of channel catfish, which is another story I probably said before. But I was fishing this river up near Ottawa, and I was fishing a big whopper plopper, and I just cast along this weed bed. I was reeling it in, and then boom, this fish hit like a freight train. And I thought it was a muskie because there's lots of muskie in this river. Comes up, it was like an 8-pound channel catfish. And I was like, no way. That's crazy. I threw it back. I took some pictures. I threw it back. The next cast, boom, another catfish on a topwater. There must have just been a bunch of them just feeding up near the surface. And I was literally blown away. And then I cast I was drifting downriver because it's a river. So my whopper plopper was like in the water, and it was kind of drifting behind the boat. And I was like, you know what? Andrew always jokes that I should troll a whopper plopper.
There's no reason why a straight retrieve topwater shouldn't work while being trolled.
So I'm literally trolling back up to the spot where I originally caught the fish because I drifted so far down. And the whopper plopper was like 30 feet behind the boat. Just, and this fish comes up, boom, smokes it. And my rod just like, I had it tucked in my knee and it was just bucking down. And I was like, oh my goodness, he was right. So that day I caught 3 catfish on a topwater. I actually lost another one too. But that was the craziest thing I caught on a topwater. Here's a question from Wambaits Canada, Wes. He says, you're forced to keep and fish only 3 combos for the rest of your life. What would they be? And he actually clarified the question in messages. He said 3 combos you already own. You can't just buy 3 combos.
Okay.
So go.
So I have, I'd probably go with my medium heavy 7'1" bait caster.
Yep.
With the Fuego's on it right now. It's worked well for me. So as long as, this isn't saying that reels wear out over time, but I'm assuming that that's not taken in a contest right now.
It's a magical. It'll last forever.
Perfect. So then, I'd use my Fuego and my medium heavy Fenwick is a really fun bait casting combo. My other one would probably be, I have a 6'6" Mojo Bass spinning reel, the first edition.
Spinning rod.
Spinning rod. Spinning reel. And I have the Shimano, the white one. Stratic, that's the one. I could want to say Stella, and it's not a Stella. The Shimano Stratic. I have it 2500 Stratic on there, and that was my first like good combo I bought, and I love that thing. I still have that to this day, and probably just because I've used that thing in the creeks for trout, and I've used it like it's a medium action. I've used it in the creeks for trout, pull stuff out of log jams, and I've fished bass, pike, everything with it. The third one, I'd probably have to go with like my heavy swim bait rod. I have a Mojo Bass swim bait rod now. Just that way I can fish heavy cover and heavier gear.
Nice. So if I had to pick 3 combos that I already own, it's hard because in Ontario there's so many species to fish. Like people are like, why have you have so many rods? It's like, well, I fish for multiple species that all require different rods.
I can't with my 3 selections. I can no longer fish effectively for carp, salmon, steelhead.
That's fine.
Like, I can't do any of that other fun stuff I love to do.
Yeah, so I'd have to honestly, it would be really hard, but salmon and steelhead gear I just wouldn't touch. I fished for salmon and steelhead for 20 years. I'm fine with not fishing for them and fishing other species right now. Okay, so one combo I'd definitely keep just for versatility, the same combo I was talking about before. I have a 7'1" medium power fast action St. Croix Legend Tournament bass, beautiful rod. And on that, I have a Daiwa Procyon 3000 loaded with 15-pound braid. I could use that for everything. It's light enough to use for finesse stuff. I could use it for bass, walleye, pike, everything. For the bait casting combo, I have a 7'1" or 7'2" medium heavy Shimano X Pride, beautiful rod. I'm just keeping my expensive combos for this because I don't know if we pick 3 and then Wes gets the rest of them. I'm not sure.
This question that Wes posed has it's hurting me.
It's hurting me
to think of like, oh, you can't use anything else and you only have 3. Like I feel growing up, I only have had 1 rod, maybe 2, and now it's at the point where because I've used a bunch, because I own a bunch and I use them and I see the benefit of the different applications for them, it's hurting me to have to regress and not do that. Like I can go on a trip and like, you're going to this lake, bring 3 rods. Okay. It's like bring 3 rods only for every single year, all year round. Like I can't do it.
It's hard. Yeah. So my first one, 7'1" medium spinning rod. Second one, 7'2" medium heavy bait casting rod. 30-40 pound braid. I can use that for basically 70% of bass fishing and some walleye pike fishing. And then my third combo is kind of a fun one because I was trying to think what can I use for like bait feeding for carp, and I could also use it for other things that aren't musky fishing, but I'd need a musky combo because musky has been like my drive the last 2 years. An 8.5 foot medium heavy Daiwa Pro Rex rod with my Daiwa Alexa 300 on it. And I'll tell you why. Not the most versatile musky combo ever. I'd rather get a heavy with a 400 size reel, but this combo, I can still catch musky on it. Just lighter stuff. I'd be having to chuck stuff 3 or 4 ounces and less. That's fine. In my lakes I fish, that's totally fine. I could also use that same combo because that Daiwa Pro X rod has a lot of tip to it because it's a medium heavy. I could also use that for carp fishing. Click the button open to use it as a bait feeder to let the line free spool. I could also use that combo. It would be really weird, but I could also use that for shore casting for salmon. But Wes, that was a terrible question. I used to like you. All right. So we got a question from Ryhoff95. It's a double question.
Okay.
So his first part, and you have to answer this quick. What do you guys think is the most underrated fish for consumption? Pike.
100%. Yes, pike.
Pike? I was just talking about this with someone. I forget who it was, but I was saying that pike are actually dang tasty. And I think the reason most people don't want to admit that is because they're hard to clean.
Yeah.
It's like,
And
just
they're
admit
hard
you
to
suck
clean-
at
they're
cleaning
hard to
them.
clean just because it's a different bone structure. It's
Yeah.
not harder. It's just learn a different fillet method.
They're just like, oh, pike don't taste good. It's like
the other
they do.
one-
You just don't know how to fillet them.
So you said pike first, so I'll choose a different one. Bullhead catfish.
Yes.
Tasty. Like people are like, oh, like channel cats, I get. You get a lot of meat off it. It's real delicious. Bullhead catfish also quite tasty. It just as oily like on the meat itself, so it's that's not to be, it sounds gross, but like it fries up really well.
Yeah.
And you can get bullheads that are like 14 15 inches on the big side, and you can still fillet that if you want.
Yeah. And one thing I will add is sunfish, like bluegill.
Yeah, big ones.
I go out with my nephew, he's 10, and we went out and we filled a bucket full of big sunfish, like big bluegills, the biggest ones we could catch. And on the lake we were fishing, it was fun because he's 10. He loves catching them. It was great. I like catching them. You had an ultralight with 4-pound line and a little, piece of worm under a bobber. It's fun.
Let's clarify though. You said a bucket full. What was it? 20?
Yeah.
It's not like
No,
you fit
no.
100 into
It wasn't,
a bucket.
no.
That's I just wanted to clarify for
It was
anyone
probably,
listening.
I think it was about 20, something like that. Because I
Yeah.
said to him, like, he wanted to have a fish fry, and I said, okay, let's go catch some sunfish. We caught big ones, easy to fillet.
Mm-hmm.
Fillet super easy, and you get not a lot of meat, but a decent little chunk of meat on a decent sized
It
bluegill.
cooks up so well
Cooks up
because it's
so
so
good.
thin, and they're tasty.
You beer batter those, delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
It's like fish bites.
and then his other question is our favorite fish to eat.
I really like
Sunfish, just
walleye.
kidding.
I really like walleye just because it's not something I had a lot of in my life. But I think I might have to say like catfish is something I always rant and rave about.
I
And
have to
just
say-
just have it. It's really good.
That catfish we had, so me and Andrew went up fishing this river up near the Ottawa River, and he caught some. Well, we caught some
that was a
channel
trip
catfish.
with Royce and,
Yep.
and his
And-
brother. Yep.
We caught some good channel catfish. They weren't huge ones. They were perfect eater size. They were like 3-4 pounds.
We kept what 2, fed all of us.
Yep. I think we kept 3.
Right.
Yeah.
But they
And-
weren't like 7-pounders.
No,
Those were like
they were
5-pounders tops.
They were like 3 to 5 pounds.
Yeah.
And Andrew filleted them up, and he made garlic aioli sandwiches with them.
yeah,
with some Cajun
fried,
spice.
fried it up in Cajun seasoning.
And I have to say, that was some of the best
so simple.
fish I've ever had.
It's good.
No joke. Like best camp fish.
Yeah.
It wasn't like mahi or something, but it was pretty good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for sure, walleye. This is a good question from I Catch Dinks. He says, what's your favorite brand for terminal tackle if you could only have one?
Terminal tackle. So just like hooks and stuff like that.
Hooks, sinkers, clips. There's so many good ones. That's the problem.
Yeah.
We use all
for
kinds.
hooks. I've always been partial to gamakatsu. I really like them.
Yep.
They were kind of the first one that that's because they were kind of the first one that I was like, oh, premium hooks, and I tried them out, and like my hookup percentage increased, so I really like them. I do like the fact that they have a really good selection of their finesse hooks, like extra strong finesse treble hooks, which I love. When I try to place hooks on a crankbait or a topwater, that's what I use.
Yep.
But for clips and stuff, like
VMC.
yeah, VMC has some really good ones. What's the other new one?
Ryugi.
Right, yeah.
Ryugi.
Yeah.
I bought some of their hooks. They were really good. The problem is
Shout
a lot
out
of
to,
stuff.
to Nellie's Fishing. He's the one who told me about those clips, and I'm like, these are fantastic.
Yeah.
So I want to try a bunch more stuff from them because I'm super impressed with the snaps.
Yeah. I think if I had to pick one brand, although it's not my favorite for everything, would probably be VMC.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say Mustad.
No.
Mustad has some good stuff too.
Yep. Here's a interesting question from J. Matthew. He says, how about a giveaway where you take a listener subscriber out for a day of fishing? Well, that's a good idea. We're afraid of serial killers, so...
And also, if we take someone out, that means that there'd be 3 of us in the largest boat we own, which is a 14-foot tinner, which means none of us are going to be fishing at our optimal with enough space around us to do so.
If you'd like to fish with us, we're going to mention another question that will give you possibly the opportunity to do that. Not that you want to, because we're just average. You're not going to learn anything. You're going to be like, wow, these guys eat chili.
Yeah, cold chili.
So here's a question. He says... J. Matthew, will there be an AOA fishing derby next year? if you listen to last week's podcast, we talked about the AOA fishing tournament that we're going to do next year. I definitely recommend listening to that for a few more details. In an extremely small nutshell, we are planning on having a small fishing derby for fun. It's going to be 100% all proceeds go to charity, fishing charity, interesting enough. And you're going to have 2 divisions. One division is kayaks, canoes, small boats. The other division,
that's anything up to 20 horsepower.
Yep. So basically 10 boats and smaller boats and possibly shore fishing, but it's going to be more of a boat tournament. And then the other sector is going to be a pro-am, which is going to be, we have a bunch of guys already that own boats. And if you're someone that has a boat and that would like to sign up for this, definitely let us know. So you're going to have people with bigger boats, a few guys that have bass boats as well, and you're going to have to draw a name out of a hat to fish with them for the day. And all you have to do is give them some gas money and donate some money to this charity, and you'll be in. And it's just going to be a fun tournament. We're not going to make people buy bump boards and stuff, but me and Andrew are going to judge it in a way we deem fit. And then there's going to be a few trophies, some prizes from some sponsors, and it's going to be a fun day.
And don't cheat, or we'll be forced to cut open every single fish that you bring out.
Yeah, there's weight in fish. Okay, this is an interesting question from Tony. Most ridiculous purchase?
Most ridiculous? Probably my snake lure I bought off Amazon.
You've caught fish on it, though.
That's the thing. It turned out to be not so ridiculous.
What's my most ridiculous purchase? I have so many. It's just a lot of the stuff I buy, I either buy and I just don't use, or I think I need it and then I don't actually need it. So I'd say like half of the stuff I buy, I would deem as a ridiculous purchase. But anyone who fishes knows the addiction of just buying random stuff you'll never use.
Anyone who has ever bought a G-Loomis, that was ridiculous. I'm just kidding.
Hey, I own a few of those. Here is a good question. Least favorite fishing lure? Cameron asked that question.
Least favorite?
Or just like lures in general. Like what lure don't you like fishing?
Probably Senko, just because I feel like a dummy when I use it. Like it's the thing I turn to last.
Yeah.
Like I prefer to catch something on almost anything else. I'm not saying they don't work. They work awesome. That's the thing. I want to challenge myself. So I don't like having to resort to the Senkos. When I get a day where I bring the Senko out, I'm like, it hasn't been a great day.
Yeah. I'd say for me, just because I grew up fishing a lot of weedy lakes, I don't like fishing crankbaits. Andrew's the opposite. Andrew loves it. Whenever I'm fishing, the crankbait is like really far down on the roster of things I'm going to chuck. But I'm learning slowly. Here's a good question. How many rods have you broken this year? Well, I usually break about one a year, and this year I broke one. Last year I broke one. And actually, funny story. So last year I broke one on a 2-day fishing trip with Andrew. I broke a brand new St. Croix jerkbait rod in the car, in the door. That was fun. And it was right at the beginning of the trip, so I didn't get to use it. That was fun. Mm-hmm. This year, the same thing happened. The same fishing trip that we do at the same month, on a 2-day trip, I broke a St. Croix drop shot finesse rod.
The rod that
in the
you
car.
Got to replace the other one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when they were like, what rod do you want to replace it? I actually bought another jerkbait rod because I didn't want to wait that last year for the warranty. So I got a finesse drop shot rod instead. I broke that rod. And I broke it, and I only caught one fish on it. It was brand new. It's still like the cork was like, you know, that fresh cork smell. It was still like that.
Jesse has broken more rods in the past 2 years than I have in my life. Yeah, I've been very fortunate.
But I also buy generally higher end rods than you.
I've broken 2 rods,
which are very delicate.
Yes,
and I don't handle them like I should. Andrew's like, I haven't broke a rod, and it's like an ugly stick. Obviously not. Okay, here's a good question. Six angling.
How you know it was the Bass Pro Tourney Special? That was my first rod I ever broke. It cost $40.
Ooh. For $10 million, would you give up fishing forever? You can't do anything related to fishing.
No.
Absolutely not.
Why?
You couldn't pay me enough money to give up fishing. Unless it was like $60 billion. And then I would just try to find another hobby that I liked, and then I would cry myself to sleep every night.
Fishing is like the hobby where I'm like, if I ever had a windfall of money, that's what I'd invested in. Like, yeah.
Here, the only way that I would answer yes to that question would be if I could do something fishing related. So if I could become a fishing content creator and film Andrew fishing, like I was the guy with the drone, I'm the guy taking the video, like I love that stuff. Mm-hmm. I would do it. And they're like, you can never cast a lure. I'd be like, I would hate that, but at the same time, I probably would think about it. But no, not fishing related, absolutely not. My life would be over.
The thing is, that's a cool point, because being able to capture the moment of someone else catching like a cool fish and having that's an accomplishment in itself.
Yeah. Here's the last question that we're going to do.
You do very good at a lot of the time anyways, Jesse. I just want to point that out.
I could do a lot more if I wasn't fishing.
Yes.
But it's hard when you're like, I like content creating and I also like fishing. It's like, well, I want to fish.
Which is why we're hoping to have more passive filming happen when we're on the boat next year.
Next year, we're actually upgrading a lot of camera stuff. So we're going to be posting more stuff on YouTube. So
that's the plan.
This is the last question. And if we didn't get to your question, I apologize. We got probably about 50 or 60 of them. This guy asks, why don't you creek fish for salmon?
We do. We used to a lot more.
We didn't this year.
We haven't yet.
No.
The reason being is, just especially in the past like 3-4 years, the creeks that we used to fish got a lot more people. And even before COVID, I'm not blaming everything on COVID, but even before then, we noticed that the amount of people on the creek was just getting more and more and more. So it literally just became hard for us to find a spot, because there's these guys who are showing up, at 4 a.m. and are standing in that pool until midnight. And we can't get a spot because we have to work during the day, and then we go after work and we literally can't get a spot in the creek.
Yeah.
So it got frustrating. So we haven't done as much, purely because despite it being the most accessible kind of type of fishing for salmon, it became more difficult for us to get access to it.
Yeah, and that's not to say that you can't find spots. Like salmon fishing in the fall has always been crowded. It always has been. It's gotten worse the last few years, and everyone that's fished for more than 10 years will tell you that. But you can always find spots to fish. We
found more enjoyment elsewhere.
We found more enjoyment elsewhere. That's not to saying that we don't like salmon fishing. We do. We did it for years. I've salmon fished the creek since I was literally 12 or 13 years old, when I was allowed to go down to the creek, float fishing for them. I've caught hundreds of them. No problem. Over the years, like I grew up right down the road from a creek. We put a lot of time down in the water, but like we said, in Ontario, there's so many opportunities. In the last few years, we've been obsessed with musky fishing.
Yep.
Again, when you work full time and you get 1 or 2 days off on the weekend, and you're an adult, so you have other responsibilities too. A lot of people that ask me is they're young. They're young. They're young. They live at home with their parents. They have more time. Good for you. Enjoy it while you can.
Yeah,
that's
use that
great.
opportunity to go out what you can.
Unfortunately, when you're an adult and there you have adult obligations on the weekend and stuff, when you finally get a day to go fishing, you have to decide what you want to do. And for me, salmon, been there, done that. No hard feelings against anyone that wants to salmon fish. I totally agree. It's a great fish. We've been musky fishing in the fall. All of September, all of October, we're musky fishing every weekend. We have plans like musky fishing. And that's just us. And you know what? Maybe in 5 years, we'll be like, we're done with musky. Probably not, because we suck at it.
Musky fishing is what has made me enjoy fall. For a long time, fall is my least favorite month. I hated fall. Spring, I love spring. I like seeing green. I didn't like seeing fall colors. I even hated looking at it, because it just, to me, it means winter's here.
Yeah.
When we went musky fishing, and I caught my first musky like 3 years ago, that was the first time when I was like going home that day. It sounds real cheesy, but I was like, oh, it's such a good, beautiful day. Like all that excitement. I got my first muskie, and it was a beautiful day. And now like fall is exciting, because I'm thinking of like, it was something really to look forward to. And I had fished salmon before in the fall, but it didn't have that same enjoyment for me.
Yeah.
Muskie was like, that was a special experience. And now we were out last weekend going for muskie, didn't even see one. But the whole time we're on the water, we're like, oh, we're pointing at like the clouds rolling by and the beautiful like scenery and the shoreline, the loon, and yes, the fall colors. Like, it was beautiful.
We're such old men now.
Yeah.
Look at that! Look at the trees over there.
So it was so nice. Musky fishing has made me enjoy the fall. So that's why that's been more of my focus as well.
Yeah, and one thing that I really like about musky fishing, I had a lot of people ask me like, oh, you can catch 25-pound kings right off the pier close to your house. That's cool. Again, done it before. I've really grown as an angler and been humbled, because I think a lot of people that fish for big fish like salmon, they think they're like fishing legends. They're like, oh, I catch salmon, huge ones. Yeah, that's cool, but anyone can do that. If you're going musky fishing, you are instantly humbled. I don't care if you're the best musky angler ever. If you listen to some of the musky fishing podcasts with like Stephen Paul, Musky 360, he's a hammer, a musky guide. The guy's like a legend, but he will tell you sometimes you can't catch them.
Yeah.
Like, musky fishing is super humbling. if you're one of those guys that's super cocky, take up musky fishing, and I guarantee you will be pulling out your hair at some point. They're the most unpredictable, stubborn, stupid fish. But when you catch that one fish, even after like 7 or 8 days of fishing, it 100% is worth it. You're like, yes, that was worth it, especially if it's a nice one. So we're hoping that by the time this podcast comes out, that we've both caught giants. But in the next podcast, if we haven't, we'll just be crying and not sound good. But anyway,
we'll still be just as excited saying, there's still time to catch one.
It's ice up soon. Anyway, that's a lot of questions. Really enjoy these like Q&As because it's funny, and I never realized before we started a podcast or an Instagram, I'm like, no one thinks we're interesting, which is fine because we're not. But then we made an Instagram, and it's like, oh, okay, these people follow us. And then we had a podcast, and that really blew my mind because it's like all these people listen to you talk every week, and then we ask questions and get 50 questions in 2 hours. It's like, wow, that's crazy. So we appreciate all that.
Yeah. Thank you everyone who's continues to listen to this podcast. If you have the opportunity, a great way to have other people enjoy the podcast as well is by word of mouth. We love to get reviews as well. So on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, I'm one of the weirdos that listens on Google Podcasts. Google is closing that down. So we're going to have to go on to Spotify and Apple. So if you left a review anywhere before, and let's say you listen to it on a new streaming platform, by all means, leave a review again. Maybe your mind has changed and now you deserve even more stars than what you put last time.
6.
So thank you again for everyone who has this hand, not only listening themselves, but sharing that and helping out for other people to find the podcast as well. We do have a Patreon as well that Jesse has linked below in the show notes. So if you have an opportunity, it's a couple bucks a month if you want to help contribute, and that just goes towards our operating costs for the podcast itself. We're not making loads of money off this by any means. And there are monthly expenses, as Jesse always mentions as well. So thank you again for listening. Jesse, what's the message of the week?
The message of the week is winter is coming.
Word. And that was the first reference to that.